The morning sun was just starting to think about rising, painting the sky a soft gray blue as Henry's old truck rumbled into the stadium lot. It was his favorite time. The world was quiet, and the field, his field, was waiting. He liked the routine of it. The same parking spot by the service gate, the heavy jingle of his key ring, the solid clunk of the lock turning. The air inside the concrete tunnel was cool and smelled of dirt and old popcorn. His office was a shed, but to him it was a command center. Rakes and shovels stood in neat rows like soldiers. Cans of chalk paint and bags of drying agent were stacked on shelves he'd built himself. He filled his metal thermos with the strong, black coffee he'd brewed at home and took that first slow walk out to the dirt warning track that bordered the bright green grass. This was his ritual. He'd walk the warning track, his eyes scanning, his feet feeling. He knew every inch. He knew where the clay near third base got a little too sticky after a heavy watering. He knew the exact spot in right field where the drainage was slow. He'd stop, take a sip of his coffee, and just look. The empty stands were like a sleeping giant. In a few hours, it would wake up with noise and life, but for now, it was all his back in the shed. The morning's mail was on his workbench, mixed in with invoices for fertilizer. Most of it was the usual stuff, but one envelope was different. It was too white, too smooth. The return address had the name of the team's new parent company, some big group from the city he'd never heard of. He wiped his hands on his trousers, careful not to get dirt on the paper, and used a pocket knife to slit it open. The words were polite, full of phrases like future forward vision and community revitalization. His eyes skimmed over them, looking for the heart of it. He found it in the third paragraph. After a final commemorative season, the historic Marigold Stadium will be deconstructed to make way for a state-of-the-art mixed-use retail and residential complex. Henry read it again, then a third time. The words seemed to slide off his brain, not wanting to stick. Deconstructed. Not closed, not retired. Deconstructed. He pictured giant machines with claws. He looked out the shed's small window at the field. The sprinklers had just come on, throwing rainbows in the low morning light. It was so alive that a strange quiet filled the shed, louder than any noise. The familiar sounds, the hum of the fridge where he kept his lunch, the distant traffic, seemed to fade away. He carefully folded the letter back along its crisp lines and placed it under a half-full can of neat's foot oil on the bench, as if the weight of the can could hold the news down that he didn't sit. He didn't sigh dramatically. That wasn't his way. The field needed tending. The visiting team's batting practice would start in a few hours, and the home plate area needed fresh clay. He picked up his clay rake, its wooden handle worn smooth by his grip over 27 years. The physical work was a relief. The repetitive drag of the rake, the gentle patting down of the loose dirt into a perfect, smooth mound. It was a language his body understood. His mind, however, was buzzing. This was more than just losing a job. This place was the rhythm of his years. The seasons weren't marked by spring, summer, fall, and winter, but by preseason, opening day, the long summer grind, and the quiet of the off-season, when he could do his big repairs. He thought of all the people. Not the star players who'd moved on to the big leagues, but the others. The elderly usher who always had a mint for him. The woman who ran the souvenir stand and knew how he took his coffee. The kids who pressed their faces against the fence to watch him paint the crisp, white lines. This was their place too. A town's backyard that as he worked, the initial shock began to settle into a dull, heavy feeling in his chest. It was the feeling of counting down. Every task he did now, mowing the outfield grass in that perfect crisscross pattern, chalking the batter's boxes, would have a number. This is the second to last time I'll drag the infield for a Friday night game. This is the last time I'll prepare the field for a June day game with school kids in the stands. He finished the mound and stood back to look at his work. It was perfect, a rich brown circle against the green. It looked eternal. But the letter on his bench said it wasn't. For the first time that morning, he felt a small crack in his routine. The day no longer felt wide open and endless. It felt precious and already slipping away. He took a long, last look at the empty stadium, took a swig of now cold coffee, and went to start the lawnmowers. The work, for now, was the only answer he had. The next morning, the heaviness was still there in Henry's chest, a low and steady ache like a bruise. He went through the motions, unlocking the gate, firing up the coffee pot in the shed, lacing up his worn work boots. But today, his usual walk around the warning track felt different. It wasn't just an inspection. It felt like he was saying hello to old friends, knowing he'd soon have to say goodbye for good as the first pink light of dawn touched the top of the bleachers. Henry stopped near the home dugout. He ran a hand along the top of the bench. The wood was smooth and warm, worn down by decades of players sitting there, waiting for their turn at bat. He closed his eyes for a second. The empty stadium wasn't silent. It was full of echoes. Right there, in section 12 just above the dugout, he remembered a hot August night back in the late 80s. A foul ball had screamed into the seats. A man in a tired-looking suit had tumbled over 2 rows, his arms flailing, and somehow came up with the ball, his glasses crooked on his face. The crowd had roared. But Henry, who was raking the dirt nearby, saw what happened next. The man hadn't kept the ball. He'd rushed over to his young son, who was wrapped in a blanket despite the heat, and pressed the baseball into the boy's small hands. The boy's face, pale and tired, had lit up like the stadium lights. Henry never knew what happened to that boy, but he always hoped that moment, right there in that seat, was a good memory in a hard time. He moved on, his fingers trailing along the cool chain-link fence by the third base gate. A spring rainstorm in '99 had been so sudden and violent it sent everyone scrambling. A young couple, maybe on a first or second date, had been caught under the overhang right here. They'd been laughing, soaked to the skin, sharing a single soggy pretzel. He'd seen the young man, brave from the storm or from the sugar, lean in and kiss her. Henry had pretended to be very busy with a drainage grate. Months later, a wedding invitation had shown up in his shed mailbox, a little damp at the corners. He hadn't gone. Big crowds weren't his thing, but he'd kept it for years. Every corner held a silent story only he knew. The scuff mark on the dugout floor from a pitcher's furious cleat after a bad inning. The patch of outfield grass in left center that always grew a little slower and thicker, where a groundskeeper before him had maybe patched something underground. The faint, almost invisible ink stain on the press box stairs from a reporter who'd spilled his pen in a rush to meet a deadline 20 years ago. He was the only one left who knew these things. The players came and went. The managers changed. The owners sold the team to new owners. But Henry had stayed. He was the living memory of the place. He was the keeper of the small human history that never made the newspapers or the record books. The championship banners hung in the rafters told one story. But the worn spots on the concrete, the marks on the walls, the specific way the wind whistled through a crack in the scoreboard after midnight, that was the real story. And he was the only one left to read it. A sharp crack broke the silence. The first player of the day, a young guy trying to make an impression, was taking early batting practice. The sound echoed in the hollow stadium. Henry watched the ball sail high and deep, landing with a soft thud on the grass he just mowed. It left a small, temporary dent. That's what this place was, he realized. It wasn't the bricks and the seats and the steel. It was a collection of dents. Small marks left behind by joy, by heartbreak, by people just living their lives on a summer evening. His job had never been to keep the field perfect. It had been to care for these dents, to smooth them over so the next moment could have its turn, to keep the stage ready for the next small human drama. The letter in the shed had talked about deconstruction. To the people who wrote it, this was just a building, an old one that took up valuable space. They saw concrete and land. They didn't see the ghost of a father handing his sick son a baseball. They didn't hear the echo of a first kiss in the rain. They didn't feel the nervous energy still buzzing in the on-deck circle. A deep sense of loneliness washed over him, colder than the morning dew. When the wrecking ball hit, it wouldn't just knock down walls. It would erase all of this quiet, invisible history. And he would be the only witness to what was lost. He finished his walk, the ache in his chest now mixed with a fierce, protective pride. He picked up the baseball from the outfield grass. It was cool and smooth in his hand. He gave it a gentle toss towards the batter, who gave him a grateful wave. Henry nodded back. For the rest of the day, he worked with a new kind of focus. As he painted the foul lines, his brushstrokes were careful and deliberate, as if he were writing something down. As he dragged the infield dirt, he made sure the patterns were just so. He was no longer just maintaining a field. He was preserving a museum, a library of moments. And he had one final season to be its curator. The weight of the news settled into Henry's days, changing them in small, almost invisible ways. It was like a low hum in the background of everything he did. But his routine, the one he had built over 27 years, remained. It was the one thing the letter couldn't touch, not yet. This routine was his anchor. It was what held him steady when the thought of the future felt like a dark, empty hole. His day always began in the dark. The 4:30 alarm was not an enemy but a familiar signal. The drive through the sleeping town, the streets glossy under the streetlights, was his quiet time. 5:30 a.m. The heavy service gate groaned open under his hand, a sound he knew in his bones. He would stand for a moment in the concrete tunnel, the stadium looming ahead, black against the slowly lightening sky. This was the threshold. Then the first ritual, the walk. Not with tools, just him. His boots made a soft, crunching sound on the warning track. He would walk slowly, his head down, not just looking but feeling. His feet were like sensors. He could feel a soft spot near the shortstop's position before he could see it. He knew the exact give of the clay around home plate. This walk was his conversation with the field. "How did you sleep?" his steps seemed to ask. "Any aches and pains?" 6:00 a.m. Back to the shed. The old percolator coffee pot, its glass knob stained brown, would be filled. The gas flame would pop to life with a blue hiss. While it brewed, its smell mixing with the scent of grass and dirt, he would lay out his tools for the morning's first task. This order, coffee brewing, tools ready, was as important as the work itself. The sounds of his morning were like a familiar song. The sudden, startling hiss of the sprinkler system kicking on, followed by the steady, peaceful sprinkle whir as the heads rotated. It was a sound of life, of growth. Then came the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack from the batting cages as the first eager players arrived, hitting ball after ball into the waiting nets. It was the sound of hope, of effort. From the concourse, he'd hear the distant, comforting clatter of the concessions manager rolling up the metal gates, the rumble of the first food warmers being fired up. It was the sound of a community waking up. This was his world, a world built not on words, but on actions and sensations. The smooth handle of his favorite rake, the gritty feel of the drying agent in his palm, the perfect, satisfying tear of a fresh roll of warning track clay when he cut it open. Now, with the final season ticking away, these routines felt more precious. He found himself listening more closely. He would pause while chalking a line just to hear the full song of the sprinklers. He would watch the arc of a practice home run not as a groundskeeping problem, but as a beautiful, fleeting thing. The young front office staff, buzzing with plans for final season promotions and nostalgic merchandise, lived in a world of paper and computer screens and loudspeaker announcements. Henry lived in a world of dirt and grass and quiet, diligent care. Their job was to celebrate the stadium's past loudly. His job had always been to tend to its present, silently point one afternoon, as he was carefully watering a new patch of grass behind left field. The new general manager, a man with a crisp shirt and energetic eyes, walked over. "Henry, the field looks incredible. Always does." Henry nodded. A silent thank you. "You know," the GM said, looking around, "we're planning a huge finale. Last game ever. Fireworks, videos, the whole deal. Maybe even fly back some old players." He clapped Henry on the shoulder. "We'll make sure you have a great seat." Henry looked down at the hose in his hand, water pattering on the thirsty grass. A great seat, to watch it end. The idea felt all wrong, like being a guest at your own home's farewell party. "Thank you," Henry said, his voice quiet. I'll probably be right here. Might be some last-minute things to see to." The GM laughed, a friendly sound. "Always working. Well, the offer stands." He walked off, already talking into his phone. Henry turned the water off. The silence felt deeper now. His routine was his armor, but the world outside was starting to press in. The final season wasn't just a fact on a calendar. It was a feeling in the air, a look in people's eyes when they walked in, a new, sad tone in the broadcaster's voice when he mentioned the historic ballpark. That evening, as he locked up, he didn't leave right away. He sat on the steps of the dugout, the cool concrete seeping through his trousers. The stadium was utterly still. No sprinklers, no batters, no fãs. Just the sigh of the evening wind in the flagpole ropes. This was his church. These rituals, the early arrival, the feel of the earth, the sounds of preparation were his prayers. They were how he showed his care, day after day, year after year. The impending end felt like a doctor telling him his own heartbeat would soon have to stop. But for now, the rhythm continued. The next morning, the alarm would ring again. The gate would groan. The coffee would brew. And for a little while longer, the song of the sprinklers and the thwack of the bats would be the only scripture he needed. He stood up, his knees cracking, and walked to his truck. The routine held. And for now, that was enough. The season wore on, a slow and steady march toward the end. The summer heat baked the field, and Henry fought it with water and care. The final season banners, once strange and jarring, became a normal part of the view, like a constant, quiet reminder ticking down the days. One sticky Tuesday afternoon. The receptionist from the front office stuck her head into the shed. Her phone was pressed to her shoulder. "Henry? The GM wants to see you in his office when you get a minute." Henry looked up from sharpening the blade of an edging tool. He gave a short nod. He had a good idea what this was about. He washed his hands at the deep sink, the gritty soap scraping against the soil ground into his skin. He didn't bother changing his shirt, a faded polo with the team's old logo, worn soft from 100 washes. Walking through the carpeted front offices always felt strange. It was too quiet, too cool. The air smelled of paper and cleaning products, not grass and diesel from the mowers. The GM's door was open. The man himself was on the phone, but he waved Henry in with a big, friendly gesture. "Absolutely. A sellout, we're hoping for a sellout," the GM was saying into the phone. He hung up and his smile turned to Henry. "Henry, come in, sit down. Sorry to pull you from the field." Henry sat carefully on the edge of a sleek, modern chair that felt less sturdy than his wooden stool in the shed. "We're deep in planning for the final month," the GM began, leaning forward on his spotless desk. "We want it to be special. A real send-off. Alumni weekend, fan appreciation, giveaways every night." His eyes were bright with the energy of it all. "We want it to be a celebration of everything this place has meant." Henry nodded again. He believed the man meant well. "And we want you to be a part of it," the GM said, his tone becoming more earnest. "You're as much a part of this place as anyone. More maybe. So we have an idea." He paused for effect. "On the very last night, for the ceremonial first pitch, we want you to throw it." The words hung in the air-conditioned room. Henry looked down at his hands resting on his knees. They were wide, capable hands. The knuckles were slightly swollen from years of work. There were nicks and scars, some old and silver, some still pink. A permanent line of dirt was etched under his fingernails. These were hands that knew how to grip a shovel, to guide a mower, to feel the moisture in a handful of dirt. They were not hands that threw baseballs in front of thousands of people. The image flashed in his mind, walking out onto the perfectly groomed grass in a clean, unfamiliar jersey. The roar of the crowd, the pressure of the ball in his hand, the awkward throw maybe bouncing in the dirt, people politely clapping. It felt like a performance, a piece of theater. It felt like being put on display like a museum piece himself. It wasn't him. The GM was still talking, excited. "Video tribute on the big screen, maybe about your years of service. You'd be a hero, Henry. A way for the fans to say thank you." But that wasn't how Henry wanted to be thanked. His thanks were in the quiet of the morning, in the smell of the freshly cut grass, in the knowledge that the field was safe and ready. His conversation with the stadium had always been a private one. He cleared his throat. "That's a real kind offer," he said. his voice rough from disuse. But I don't think so. The GM's smile faltered a little. No? It would be a great moment. I know, Henry said. He was searching for the right words, words that weren't in his usual vocabulary. It's just, that's not my job. My job's to get the field ready for that pitch. To make the mound right for the pitcher who comes after. He looked up, meeting the GM's eyes. I'd feel out of place. There was a silence. The GM looked a little confused, but not offended. He was a man who understood grand gestures, but not quiet ones. Well, the GM said finally, leaning back, the offer stands if you change your mind, but we'd still love your help. You know the secrets of this place better than anyone. Are there any spots, any little corners that mean something? For photographs, for our historical displays. This Henry could do. This felt closer to the truth. He nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. I can do that, he said. There's a few places. He spent the next hour walking with a young intern who carried a clipboard. Henry didn't tell her the stories. He just pointed. Get a picture of this dugout bench, the end one. The way the light hits that railing in the evening from this angle. The view from the very top row of the bleachers, right behind home plate. And the tool shed door. The handle especially. The intern scribbled notes, taking pictures with her phone. She saw only old wood and rusty metal. Henry saw the bench where a nervous kid had put on his first professional cleats. He saw the railing where generations of fans had leaned their hopes. He saw the view that had witnessed a million dreams. He saw the shed door he had opened and closed 10,000 times. The handle shaped by his own grip. It was a compromise. They got their historical record, and he got to point a silent finger at the real, beating heart of the place, even if no one else could see it yet. He left them to their photographs and went back to his shed. The invitation to be a star on the last night was still there, floating in the air behind him. But here, with the familiar smell of oil and grass, he felt grounded again. His role wasn't to take a bow. It was to make sure the stage was worthy of one last great performance. The heart of the season settled in. A long stretch of hot days and crowded nights. The final season buzz was everywhere. In the newspapers, on the local news, in the chatter of the fans who came in larger numbers, their eyes a little more wistful. Henry worked through it all, a steady, quiet figure in the storm of nostalgia. It was a Tuesday game, one of those lazy afternoon ones where the crowd was thin and the pace was slow. The heat shimmered off the field. Henry was doing what he called in-game touch-ups, a small wheel drag mat behind him to smooth the dirt around the bases between innings. His focus was on the ground, on the rhythm of pull, step, pat. He felt eyes on him. Not the glancing kind from the stands, but a steady, thoughtful gaze. He looked up. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, was pressed against the chain-link fence by the left field bullpen. He wasn't watching the game. His head was turned, his eyes following Henry's every move. Henry gave a small, unsure nod and went back to his work. But when he glanced again a minute later, the boy was still there, still watching. There was a seriousness to his face that seemed too old for him between innings. As the players swapped sides with a slow, heat-drugged pace, Henry walked over. He wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. Up close, the boy had freckles and hair that stuck up a little in the front. He held a small, worn glove in one hand. You see something interesting out here? Henry asked, his voice coming out gruffer than he meant. The boy didn't smile. He pointed a finger not at Henry, but at the ground behind him. At the perfect, straight line Henry had just left in the dirt. Your job, the boy said, his voice clear. You get to make it perfect for them, don't you? Henry felt the words like a small, sudden punch in the chest. He stood there, the sun beating on his neck, the sounds of the stadium, the organ music, the vague murmur of the crowd, fading to a hum. In all his 27 years, through all the bosses and players and fans, no one had ever said it like that. They said, keep up the field, or nice grass, or grounds crew does a good job. They never put it together. They never saw the purpose. He wasn't just cutting grass. He was making a canvas. He wasn't just raking dirt. He was preparing a stage. He was the first act, the one who set the scene so the heroes and the drama could happen. His perfection wasn't for its own sake. It was a gift, a silent, steady gift to the players, to the game, to every person in the stands. He looked at the boy, really looked at him. The boy's eyes were waiting for an answer. "Yeah," Henry finally said, the word thick in his throat. He cleared it. "Yeah, I try to." The boy nodded, as if this confirmed something very important he had been thinking about. "It's a good job," he stated simply. Then, as if his mission was complete, he turned his head to finally watch the game. A batter was stepping into the box. Henry stood there for another moment, then went back to his dragging. But something had shifted. He pulled the mat, and the line it left in the dirt wasn't just a chore. It felt like a signature. For the rest of the game, Henry was aware of the boy's presence. He didn't look over often, but he could feel it. When he had to go water down the dusty path near the on-deck circle, he saw the boy was still there, his glove now on his hand, watching the careful arc of the spray from the hose. When Henry walked to the shed to get a fresh bag of chalk, he saw the boy's head turn to follow him. He wasn't being watched with idle curiosity. He was being studied. The boy was seeing the invisible man, the one who made the magic possible, and had decided he was worth paying attention to. In the seventh inning, a foul ball skittered along the fence line right near where the boy stood. A player tossed it over the fence to him. The boy caught it neatly in his glove, a flash of a smile breaking his serious face. He looked down at the ball, then his eyes searched and found Henry, who was leaning on his rake near the dugout. The boy held the ball up slightly, not a showy gesture, just a small, shared recognition. Henry nodded back. When the game ended and the fans began to file out, the boy was led away by a man who must have been his grandfather. He looked back once over his shoulder, not at the field where the players were, but at Henry, who was already starting his post-game walk to inspect the damage. That evening, as Henry locked up, he thought about the boy. He thought about the simple, powerful truth in his observation. You get to make it perfect for them. The heaviness in his chest, the one that had been there since the letter, didn't feel quite so heavy. It was mixed with something else now, a sense of dignity, of quiet importance, that a child had somehow seen clearly. He had spent so long feeling like the guardian of ghosts, the keeper of silent stories. But the boy had seen him as something present, something essential. He didn't see an ending. He saw a man doing an important job right now. For the first time since the news, Henry didn't just feel like he was presiding over a farewell. He felt like he was still doing his job. And for as long as there was grass to cut and lines to chalk, that job and its quiet purpose mattered. The final week arrived. A strange, quiet energy hung over the ballpark. It was in the way the ushers lingered a little longer after the final out, in the extra photographs fans took of ordinary things like turnstiles and seat numbers. For Henry, the ticking clock was now a feeling in his gut, a constant, low hum. He went about his work with a fierce, silent focus, but a new thought had begun to grow in his mind. He couldn't just walk away and let it all be carted off to a landfill. He needed to save something, not for a museum or a display, but for himself. A piece of the truth. The idea came to him not all at once, but slowly, like a stubborn plant pushing through cracks in concrete. Felt less like a decision and more like a compulsion. One evening, long after the stadium was empty and dark, he didn't go home. He sat in his truck, the engine off, listening to the crickets. Then he got out. The security lights cast long, lonely shadows. He went to his shed, not turning on the main overhead light, just clicking on the small, dusty lamp over his workbench. Its yellow glow felt right for what he was about to do. He looked at his tools, hanging in their familiar places. He took down two: a flat-edged spade, its blade worn thin from years of use, and a small, sharp hand trowel, its wooden handle stained dark with soil. These were his. They felt like an extension of his own hands. He walked out to the field. The grass was dewy under his boots, soaking the leather in a familiar, cold kiss. He didn't go to home plate or the pitcher's mound. Those places belonged to the public story, to the heroes. He walked out to deep, deep center field. This was his territory. This was where the long fly balls died, where he had patched countless ball marks, where the grass grew thick and quiet under the summer sun. This was a place of endings and long, graceful arcs. He knelt. The earth was cool and soft. With the hand trowel he began to cut. He wasn't vandalizing. He was performing surgery. He cut a perfect 1-foot square, going deep enough to get the roots, the soil, the very life of the place. He lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked, a dense, living block. The hole it left was a dark, neat rectangle in the perfect turf. He felt a pang of guilt for marring his own work, but it was a necessary wound. He carried the square of earth carefully to the shed. From under the workbench, he pulled out an old wooden crate that had once held bags of infield conditioner. It was sturdy. He lined it with a clean burlap sack and gently settled the square of grass inside. Fit perfectly. He sprinkled a little water over it from his drinking bottle. Next, he went to the home dugout. He didn't want a souvenir from the gift shop. He wanted a piece of the work. He ran his hands along the old pine bench, the wood silvery gray and smooth as stone. He chose a spot near the end, where the grain was particularly worn. With a small pry bar, he carefully worked at a single, narrow slat. The wood groaned, a tired sound. With a soft crack, it came free. It was about 2 feet long, its edges rounded, its surface holding the faint, dark stains of decades of sweat, dirt, and spilled soda. The ghost of 100 nervous knees. Back in the shed, he placed the slat of wood next to the crate of grass. He didn't look at them as trophies. They didn't shine. They were dirty, worn, real. The grass would likely turn brown. The wood was just an old piece of scrap. But together, they were more real than any plaque or photograph could ever be. They were proof. Proof that the grass was more than just a picture of grass. It had texture, weight, a specific smell after a rain. Proof that the bench wasn't just a prop. It was shaped by real people sitting on it, carrying their hopes and disappointments. These objects held the truth of the place in a way a story never could. The truth was in the dirt under his fingernails from lifting that square, and in the scent of old pine and earth that rose from the bench slat. The next morning, under a gray dawn, he went out to center field with a bag of fresh soil and a spare piece of sod from his repair stash. He filled the hole and tamped the new sod in. He would nurse it through the final games. No one would ever know it was there, this tiny, perfect scar. That felt right. He loaded the crate and the wood into the back of his truck, covering them with an old tarp. They weren't for showing off. They were for remembering. Remembering the feel, the substance, the quiet, physical reality of a place that had been his whole world. When the wrecking ball swung, and the dust rose and all the memories became just stories people told, he would have these. Not to prove the stadium existed, but to prove he had been there, tending to it all along. The last day was a blue sky September afternoon. The kind of perfect baseball weather that felt like a gift and a goodbye all at once. The air buzzed with a different energy. It wasn't the excitement of a playoff game. It was thicker, heavier, sweetened with nostalgia. Every seat was full. People wore old jerseys and held faded pennants. The organ music seemed slower, sadder. Henry worked. He did everything he always did on a game day, but he did it with a deep, quiet concentration. He watered the infield dirt until it was a perfect, dark brown. He chalked the batter's boxes and the foul lines with extra care, the white lines glowing against the green and brown. He walked the warning track one final time, his feet knowing every dip and rise. He heard the speeches over the loudspeaker during the pre-game ceremonies. Former players, mayors, the team owner. They talked about legacy and community and memories. Henry listened from the shadow of the dugout, a grease-stained rag in his hand. Their words were big and floated away on the breeze. His memories were small and stayed on the ground, the feel of the clay, the sound of the sprinklers. The game itself was almost beside the point, a blur of noise and color. Henry watched from his usual spots, leaning against the fence near the bullpen, standing in the tunnel entrance. He saw people touching the walls as they walked out. He saw an older woman quietly crying into her husband's shoulder in the 7th inning. He felt all of it, but he didn't cry. He felt strangely calm, like he was watching from a great distance. After the final out, The real ceremony began. Fireworks boomed overhead, painting the sky in fleeting, brilliant colors. A long, sad video played on the big screen. The crowd cheered and sighed. Henry didn't watch. He was already moving. While the fans slowly filed out, clutching their commemorative bricks, Henry began his final duties. He picked up the stray cups and peanut shells. He checked the field for any divots or scars from the night's battle. The fireworks smell, sharp and sulphurous, mixed with the familiar sense of grass and dirt. One by one, the stadium emptied. The vendors shut their metal gates with a final clang. The ushers left, their voices echoing goodbye in the concrete hallways. The silence that returned was profound. It was no longer the peaceful, waiting silence of the morning. It was a finished silence. He did not make a speech to the empty stands. He did not walk to the pitcher's mound for one last look. That wasn't his place. Instead, he made his final round. He touched the handle of the manual scoreboard, which they hadn't used in years. He patted the foul pole as he passed it. He stopped at the square of sod in center field, the one he had replaced. It had taken root. You could barely see the seamed eye in the shed. He packed his personal things. His thermos, the photo of his old dog tucked on the shelf, his own worn glove. He left the team-issued tools hanging neatly. They belonged to the place. Then he began turning off the lights. Not the fancy, dramatic bank of stadium lights. They were already dark. He turned off the shed light, the one over the sink. He walked through the tunnel, flipping switches. Each click made the world a little smaller, a little darker. The field, lit only by the moon and the distant security lamps, became a pool of shadows. He stood at the home plate entrance for a long minute, looking out. He didn't feel the crushing grief he had feared. He felt a deep, tired gratitude. This place had not just been his job. It had been his companion. They had worked together, through rain and sun, for thousands of days. It had given him a purpose, a rhythm, a world of his own. He turned and walked to the service gate for the last time. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The image was etched inside him. He pulled the heavy gate closed behind him. The lock clicked into place with a sound so final it seemed to echo in the quiet street. He got into his truck. In the back, under the tarp, were the square of grass and the piece of bench. They were not symbols of what was lost. They were proof of what had been real. The story of the stadium, the one with the cheering and the fireworks, was over. But his story, the story of a man who cared for a piece of ground, was not over. That story was in his hands, in his memories, in the quiet way he had done his job until the very last minute. He started the engine and drove home under the starry sky. The field was behind him now, but it had shaped the man he was, and that, he realized, was something no wrecking ball could ever touch.